By the spring of 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy had maintained an unbroken 6-month winning streak. Their carrier groups were the dominant force in the Pacific, seizing territory from Southeast Asia to the Central Ocean. The architect of this expansion, Admiral Yamamoto, believed that Japan's window for victory was closing. His objective was to lure out and cripple the remaining American carriers before the United States could fully mobilize its industrial base. This timeline was forced forward in April 1942 when a surprise air raid on Tokyo, the Doolittle Raid, shocked the Japanese high command. Yamamoto felt immense pressure to secure his defensive perimeter and force a final, decisive battle. He developed Operation MI, a complex naval trap centered on the Midway Atoll. If the trap worked as intended, the U.S. Pacific Fleet would be neutralized, leaving the American West Coast vulnerable and forcing Washington to the negotiating table. Midway was perfect bait. Sitting just 1,100 miles from Hawaii, it was a vital sentry post. Yamamoto knew the U.S. Navy would have to fight to keep it. To ensure victory, Yamamoto split his forces, sending a diversion toward Alaska to draw American carriers north and expose Midway. Meanwhile, his main strike force of 4 heavy carriers waited west, ready to catch the U.S. fleet in a lethal crossfire. The success of this ambush relied on a single premise, that the Japanese held the element of surprise. But in a crowded basement office in Pearl Harbor, Commander Joseph Rochefort and a team of cryptanalysts were effectively reading the Japanese mail. They had broken JN-25, the primary Japanese naval cipher. This meant that as Yamamoto's orders were broadcast to his fleet, they were being decoded in Hawaii. Intelligence revealed the exact target, the date of the attack, and the composition of the fleet. Rochefort even confirmed Midway was the target by tricking the Japanese into sending a message about the island's water supply. Admiral Chester Nimitz used this data to prepare a counter-ambush. He ordered his carriers to a point northeast of Midway, positioning them to strike the Japanese before they knew they were being watched. Nimitz also gained a numerical advantage the Japanese didn't expect. The carrier Yorktown, thought to be out of the fight, was returned to service after just 3 days of emergency labor. Before a single shot was fired, the intelligence advantage had shifted the odds. The trapper had unknowingly become the target. On June 4th, as Japanese planes return from an initial strike on Midway, a scout plane radios in a sighting of American warships. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo faced a crisis. His deck crews were already rearming his planes with bombs to strike Midway a second time. Now he had to decide, launch them as they were, or take 40 minutes to swap the bombs for ship-killing torpedoes. Nagumo chose to swap weapons. Below deck, the hangar bays became a maze of fuel lines and unsecured explosives as crews frantically moved bombs. Suddenly, American torpedo bombers attacked. They were slow and easily picked off, but to destroy them, the Japanese Zero fighters dropped to low altitude, leaving the sky above the carriers undefended. Every American torpedo bomber in the first wave was neutralized without scoring a hit. However, their sacrifice successfully pulled the Japanese defensive screen down to the surface of the ocean. At 10:22 a.m., 50 American dive bombers appeared high above the fleet. Because the Japanese radars were limited and their fighters were busy at sea level, the bombers were completely undetected. The pilots pushed into 70-degree dives, screaming toward the wooden flight decks below. The bombs struck the Akagi and the Kaga, punching through to the hangars where they ignited the loose bombs and fuel lines. The resulting chain reactions turned the pride of the Japanese Navy into infernos. By 10:28 a.m., 6 minutes after the first dive began, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were sinking. The 4th would be found and destroyed hours later. The loss of 4 heavy carriers and their veteran air crews stripped Japan of its offensive reach. These were veteran sailors and pilots who had spent years training, and they were now at the bottom of the Pacific. This defeat halted Japanese expansion in the Central Pacific and shifted the Imperial Navy to a defensive posture. For the first time in the war, the strategic initiative belonged to the Allies. Midway demonstrated how the convergence of signal intelligence, pilot initiative, and 6 minutes of synchronization could derail an advance that had once seemed unstoppable.